Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving into a brand new study. We are reviving the ancient lore playlist. We are getting into the work of Elias Ashmole. This is Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum. We will be reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you were unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, the link for my book where I teach you all of these things in a rather simplified form, and the links to get in contact with me directly for either the various services or just to support the channel so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we're going to begin in a rather unusual way. Normally we start with a groundwork video, and this is going to be that, but we're going to do it in a slightly different way. Generally speaking, when we do groundwork, we go through the life of the author. That's kind of irrelevant here. The only real place that the author is involved at all is in the preamble, which we will be dealing with today. What we have here is Mr. Ashmole has collected the works of other antiquity writers about alchemy. If you were unaware, I have a little bit of experience with spiritual alchemy, a lot less with the physical alchemy, although I do perform it somewhat on a daily basis. I have, however, had some rather unconventional results from my rather unconventional beliefs. I have been able to heal myself in 4 ways. I used to have a cyst in my throat. You can go back through my videos when I began this channel and you can hear that I had trouble talking. That is something that I have healed through the use of the alchemy that we will be discussing. But in addition to that, in 2011, I was in a car wreck. I had 7 bulges, 6 herniations, 3 spinal impingements, scoliosis, stenosis, and degenerative disc disorder. I woke up every day for well over a decade at a 7 or an 8 on the pain scale. I have healed that, right? And I have not gone back and got an MRI, so I cannot definitively say that the bulges are gone or that the herniations no longer exist. But what I can definitively say is that I no longer wake up at a 7. I, generally speaking, wake up at a 0 or a 1 if I have overextended myself. That is not to say that I cannot injure myself freshly. It is absolutely a thing. If I overextend myself, it is a possibility, but I am working on a lot of that. But the major results have come from the healing work that we are going to be discussing here very shortly. In addition to that, I had shoulder surgery back in 2007. I got about 80% of my range of motion and strength, and now I have 100%. That was an accidental healing. In addition to that, 6 months ago, in just a couple of days, my leg was broken. The tibial plateau was fractured. I am running about 2/3 of my 2-mile daily journey. All of that is to say that I have had physical results with the things that I am talking about. I am not going to be bringing things up that I do not have an understanding about. I have spent an extensive amount of time discussing all of the ideas that we are about to discuss. And we're going to start this instead of dealing with Mr. Ashmole, because he really only did the preamble before he assimilated all these other sources. We're going to talk terminology. I very often, as a matter of fact, pretty much every video, say that if I lose you in the terminology, there will be playlists. This is one of those videos that I am going to be pointing to in the playlists for this, right? And so we're going to define several things before we begin this because it will be intrinsic to the understanding going forward for alchemy. First off, we're going to address one of the major problems. One of the major problems dealing with alchemy is the time period in which it was prevalent. There was, at that point, the falling away from the control system that was the Catholic Church and the beginnings of the new control systems that was the Protestant denominations in their multitude. Because of the religious climate at the time, it wasn't necessarily beneficial to whoever the individual would be, to state the things in the way that I will be stating them, because they would die. Very short, right? This was from the 14 to the 1700s. It was the active period of the Spanish Inquisition. It was when there was severe contention between all of the churches, and anyone that stepped outside of the doctrine of the various things tended to have some consequences rain down upon their heads, quite literally in some cases. And so most of these people will be at least couching their language in the language of Christianity. That is a problem for me because there are several misunderstandings about Christianity. I know that already is stepping on toes. I will refer you to the Bible study where I have read through the Bible aloud in the same way that we're going to be doing in this study. It's kind of where we began. When I began that, I was a Christian. When I ended it, I was not. And it is because of the things that I read in the Bible. There are many, many, many problems, and we will be addressing several of them as we go through, but the primary one is the Trinity. There is a Trinity, but it is not represented in any way, shape, or form. Well, that's big words, right? It is not represented by any one particular person ever at any point in time. There was never a physical representation of the Logos fully enacted. Here is the reasoning why. I also have another video. This video is about 20 minutes long. It is the Divine and the Trinity explained, and it is going to do this much deeper. But before the beginning, there was God, and God was infinite and without form. The void. That is a vocabulary word. Hold on to that. God decided that he wanted to create creation, and so he became creation. He limited himself from the infinite void into the finite spirit, right? He went from God to the spirit. God still exists outside of the creation, but everything inside of the creation is the spirit. The spirit is quite literally every single thing in existence at the exact same time. You can break that down into the monad, which is all of the elements, right? Everything that is listed on the periodic table of elements, that is the spirit, right? It is the spirit in its pure form, and that moment of transition when it went from the infinite into the finite was the beginning. The spirit was created, but we did not yet have any of the compounds or the mixtures. None of the elements in combination, but all of them existing as primary elements where they are kind of in stasis. That is a snapshot, right? Like taking a Polaroid picture, and that is everything held in perfect stasis, but existent. That is the beginning. And then God spoke, and God said, I am the light. That is the first of the very major complications in the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, you will see that it is translated as, let there be light. That is a mistranslation. Again, fall back to Genesis. But what he actually said was, I am the light. And he became the light, and the light was good. Every single instance where it says, let there be, in the book of Genesis, every single instance, he is actually saying, I am. The expression of that is a word that is not really a word. It is the breath of creation. It is remarkably similar to the sound of magnetics, or haya, or haya, or right? That is the name of God. Now, that is placing a name upon the spirit more than anything, because God is beyond the limitations of name. We can only name the limited God that limited himself into the creation, and that is the spirit. But God spoke and he said, I am the light, and became the light, and the light was good. He said, I am the division of the night and the day, and there was, and it was good. And then he said, I am the waters above and the waters below, and the division, right? All the way through. When he spoke, when he said, I am the light, and became the light, that was the Logos beginning. That was every one of those elements being put into motion. And that motion imparted into them the capacity to become compounds and mixtures. Keynote, alchemy, right? And so we have one definition or one vocabulary word that is the void. The next vocabulary word is the spirit. The next one is the spirit in motion. That is the Logos. When God said, I am the light, That was the Logos. The Logos is the exact same as the I am. It is the breath of creation. It is the spoken word that created existence. It was never a person. There is one of our intrinsic problems. On the opposite side of the void, you have the void, which is the infinite possibilities, and then you have the infinitesimal point of light, right? The infinitesimal point of light enters into the void, and then creation begins. That is the Logos. They are two sides of the same coin. We will be using this as a reference because the whole reason that I put this here was so that it could be a reference. That is represented here, right? We have this one big circle. This one big circle right here represents the entirety of the spirit. Another vocabulary word for the spirit is going to be Mercurius, not Mercury, not, what was the other one? Mercurialis, but Mercurius. Mercurius represents both the positive and the negative. This white circle right here, that represents the positive, the creative, the masculine. This black circle down here represents the feminine, the generative, and the absorptive. Both of these comprise the entirety of the Holy Spirit. That is the 1 and the 3 in the number of manifestation, which is 138. These two right here, this is the void, the potential for all things. This is the light that creates, right? Changing that potential into actuality, going from potential energy into kinetic energy, even. You can see a manifestation of this by fire. Fire is the representative for the spirit, right? What is happening right here is that there is butane contained in this lighter, and I have decided through my will to spark it. When I decide to spark it and I give the spark to it, there is a change that takes place. That change that takes place is going from butane into carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide and the various other elements that are created, or compounds, that are created when you burn it. The process of burning it is the change happening, and the light that you see is the physical actuation of that change. It is allowing you to see what the change is. Another example of that is lightning. Lightning is the exact same thing. You, right now, are surrounded by potential energy. The air that surrounds you contains the capacity to be charged at any point in time. There are variables to that, right? If you're inside, it's much less likely that you will be stricken by lightning, but it is still a possibility. This is potential energy. That is the void. There is lightning. That is the actuation of that energy. It is physical change taking place, and we're able to see it. What happens when we see that is an ionization process, and there is moisture contained, and I'm using moisture because it is the easiest. There are other things too. That is hydrogen times 2 and oxygen times 1, and the lightning comes down and it separates those. Some of those separations go into hydrogen oxide, which is H1O1. Some of it goes into ozone, which is O3. These combinations are enabled by the lightning strike. That is physicality changing from potential into actuality. It is the physical manifestation of the change process. And so, spirit is the Logos, but it is also from what Logos changes from, both the positive and the negative. You can take control of that. What I talk about in this book is you can see right there, A Beginner's Guide to the Mechanics of Electromagnetic Manipulation and Energetic Manifestation. You can change the potential within yourself. Now we're going to get to some more vocabulary words. We've already talked about the void and the point of light. There is another trinity associated primarily with alchemy, and it is one of the reasons why we are doing this right here. There is going to be, as we go through this, a misattribution of what this is, right? So there is the Trinity, that is God outside of creation, God inside of creation as potential, and God inside of creation as that potential changing, the light, the Logos, and the void. or the light, the soul, and the void. And then there is mercury, sulfur, and salt. Those are the primary trinity that we will be seeing as we go through this, and they correlate to those things. Salt is the body, right? Salt is the physical incorporation. It is your temple of God. It is the 5D navigation device. Yes, I said 5D, not 3D. There is length, width, height, time, and thought. That is our 5 dimensions. We are rather exclusive in our use of those 5 dimensions. I have described that quite effectively in here, I believe, the theory of spiritual evolution. But salt represents your body. It also represents the void, the potential from which things are created, or the creation of things from the potential is better, right? It is the physical corporeality that is you. There is the soul. The soul comes from God directly. One of the key problems that I have with Christianity is that they presuppose condemnation upon the soul, and there is really no good reason for that. Again, see the Bible study. It is my belief that the soul is eternal. The soul came from somewheres, and it will return to somewheres, and I believe that those two things are the exact same place. I believe that we came from God, we will return to God, and that we are here for the experience for God. God cannot know grief because everything returns to him, and so he learns grief through us. He doesn't really know happiness, right? There is no real reason for happiness in eternity, but through us, he can know happiness. He can know love. He can know disappointment. All of the various trials that we have are us experiencing for God the individual things. We do that as an individual expression of God. God has taken his soul, the oversoul is a good way of looking at it, and he has portioned out a small piece of it for you. He has assigned to this 5D navigation device you. He has said, hey, here is your temple. Take care of it. You're going to be using it for a while. Get out there and get some experiences for me. And he does not care whether those are good or bad. He doesn't care whether it is positive or negative. He is here to enable you in your experience. You get to make decisions. You are the ego. And now we'll talk about the pen analogy, because this will absolutely be coming up again. You are on this side of the pen, right? Look at the pen as a coin, right? It is easier to use the pen because it is long, but it is two sides of the same thing, right? But they are diametrically opposed. You here are the physicality of God, and you here are the incorporeality of God. This is the source from which you came. This is the actuality in which you live. We call this side consciousness. We call this side the unconscious. Thank you, Carl Jung. You begin life in the conscious side of things, but just barely. You very, what's the best way of putting that? You have a small grasp of your conscious, unless you are intentionally trying to do so. But you have in this small grasp of the unconscious and this large piece of the unconscious and the small grasp of the conscious, you can begin the process, and through the process that we're talking about, you can improve your conscious decisions, pushing it farther down to this end. On this end, you have a voice that talks to you. There is a voice that will tell you, you should do this, or you should not do this. That can be either positive or negative, because the unconscious, the divine, is kind of a neutral, right? People like to look at God as good. There's not really any reason to look at him that way. There is a good reason to look at him as ambivalent. He doesn't really invest good or bad towards any particular person. You get to make those decisions on the individual soul level. But you hear these voices, right? They are unconscious in the back of your head, the still small voice. That still small voice can lead you in the right direction, or it can lead you in the wrong direction. And the one that you hear more prominently is the one that you feed. You have you making the choices, and then you have recommendations from the Spirit to help you to achieve your goals here, or to lead you away. That is the soul, which brings us to the third piece of the Trinity, which is the spirit, which we've already described, right? Now, the soul is corresponding to Mercury, not Mercurius, but Mercury. See how it gets confusing? Mercury is quicksilver, right? That is another appellation for it, but it is highly adaptable. It is a metal, but it is fluid. It is able to move and do things, and that is why it is the allegory for the thing that fills the vessel, the soul, the thing that makes the decisions and is changeable about the vessel. But you, as the resident of the temple, you don't actually make the temple move by yourself. There is the third part of this, which is sulfur. Now, sulfur and the spirit are synonymous. So is Mercurius. Mercurius, sulfur, spirit. Mercurius, sulfur, spirit. Mercurius, sulfur, spirit. I said it 3 times for a reason. The spirit is the part that actually enacts your will. You make the decision, the spirit carries it out. Whenever you say, I want to wiggle my fingers, you don't actually make that happen. What happens is that you, the resident inside of the temple, says that you want to make the temple do something, and then an electrical signal, kind of like lightning, goes from your brain to your fingertips, through your nervous system, which is heavily laced with salt, by the way. And that electrical discharge is the part that actually makes your fingers wiggle. The spirit is the part that keeps your heart pumping. It is the part that keeps you breathing when you're asleep, and it is the part that changes your food into fuel. It is unconscious, but you can take conscious control of it. You can hold your breath. That is part of it. You can increase your heart rate intentionally. That is part of it. I don't really have a good example of intentionally digesting something faster, right? That is something that I don't have experience with, but that is the spirit. That is the Trinity: sulfur, salt, and Mercury, right? It is body, salt, sulfur, fire, spirit, and then you have Mercury, which is the soul. That is a fundamental misunderstanding that we are almost certainly going to run into in every single one of the instances here. For some reason, there is a misattribution of sulfur to the soul. There is a mix-up between what the soul and the spirit does. I am here to help define those things. And part of what I do over here is we read through and we decide what is right and what is wrong. Right now, decision is a big word. A lot of it is discernment that really kind of comes from outside of me. I have a gift of discernment. It is very good. And so I have an ability to sort through some of these things and to logically go through and deduce other things. I believe that's going to get us most of the way through, but we're going to go ahead and hit the last key of this, right? What else do we have here, right? We have the big spirit, we have the 2 parts of spirit, and that gave us 1 and 3. But now we have to deal with the last number of manifestation, and that is 8. What we have represented as a sword, a scepter, a wand, a dagger, however you might happen to like to look at it, is these 7 colored balls in the middle. Now this part is up for some debate, right? This has been effective for me. It may not be for you. I do not assert that my way is the only way, but it is the way that has worked for me, so I stand on it pretty firmly. If that offends you, you're not going to enjoy the study. But each one of these little balls represents it represents one step in the balancing process. There are 8 real steps, right? But what we see here is represented the virtues and the vices. Now, there are, again, a coin, right? 2 sides of opposites. There is a balancing point right in the middle, and you are to find that balancing point in the middle. Definitionally, what we have here, it looks like the rainbow, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. There's a reason for that. There are 8 steps, there are 7 balls, and the 8th one being the full spirit. At the bottom, in the red, we have love and wrath. That is the 2 coins that we begin with. Love is the giving away of affection. Wrath is that not having that affection returned. It is a improper response, right? Too much love is a bad thing. Too much wrath is a bad thing. And the binder between those, the balancing point and the median, that is going to be kindness. You should always act with kindness as though every single person was a human being, because they are. Next up, you have lust and chastity. Lust is the wanting of physical affection, right? Throwing the hammer. Chastity is the denial of that. Neither of those is good. There is a median point in the middle, and that median point is going to be sacred union. Finding that one person that you are meant to share your soul with. Yes, you are sharing your soul in sexual union. Next, we have gluttony and denial. Gluttony is the overconsumption of the mortal coil. Denial is the underconsumption of the mortal coil, and neither one is good. The balancing point between them is going to be moderation, eating the correct fuel to get to the correct destination. Next up is the most important piece of all of this. This is the heart. This was the base, the sacral, the solar plexus. This is the heart. These are aligned with the chakras of the human. I don't know that I hit that, right? This represents the spinal cord. This is the base. It's around the perineum. This is the sacral. It is around your reproductive organs. This is the solar plexus. It is your stomach area. This is the heart. That is self-explanatory. What we have here is greed and charity. Now, greed is loving the things of the mortal coil just a little bit too much. The earth, the void here, right? These are the three primal urges in physicality, right? Wrath, sex, food. The three primal urges of physicality. The heart is the binder between the as below trinity, which is these three balls, and the as above trinity, which is these three balls. It allows manifestation to happen. This is also known as the Philosopher's Stone, the green stone. There's several other appellations that we will definitely be pointing out as we go along. But this right here, this is the key to manifestation. Please do not misunderstand that whatsoever. Next up, we go to the throat. The throat is where you express yourself. It is the area that deals with pride and humility. Pride is loving yourself a little bit too much. Humility is loving yourself not quite enough, and there is a balance between that. That is gratitude, right? Being able to do a good job, understanding that it does not make you better than anyone else, being grateful for the opportunities that you have, being grateful for the ability to finish those. The attitude of gratitude will get you a long way. Next up, we move to the third eye. There's a lot of problems with this. We have talked about it in other places. It is not in the front of your head. It is located at the pineal gland. That is the energy center, right? It is bigger than that. It rotates. There's a whole lot to it. But this is the area that deals with sloth and diligence. Sloth is not working, right? Sitting around on your ass expecting everything to just come to you. Diligence is getting out there and working, but it might be a little bit too much. You can be over diligent. The balance between those is going to be patience, taking the appropriate action and believing that it will do what it is supposed to do. And then at the crown, all the way here at the top, you have hope and despair, which brings us to the end. Hope and despair, right? Hope is believing that things are going to happen without any real reason to. Despair is believing that bad things will happen without any real reason to. The balance between those is going to be faith. Taking the right step with the right intention will lead to the right result. That is faith. It is not leaning too deeply into hope, which is with no good reason believing good things will happen. Good things might happen, they probably will happen, but if you need to have a good reason to believe so. Faith is having a good reason to believe so. The process is, right, through the meditative and prayer practices, that's another thing. Prayer, fasting, and meditation. These are the three keys that I preach all of the time. Right? Another trinity. Prayer is any active pursuit upon your part in the meditative state, right? That is you closing your eyes and talking to God. Asking for things, that is you moving the energies in the way that we do talk about. Anything where you are taking active participation is actually prayer, not meditation. Fasting is the restraining of yourself from any one of these particular virtues and vices for a specific amount of time in order to accomplish a good goal. For me, that goal, generally speaking, is to be able to hear more clearly. It kind of opens up the receptors so that you can hear from the divine just a little bit clearer. And then the last step is meditation. Meditation is the removal of self from the process so that you can hear that voice clearly. These are the 3 intrinsic steps. You do your prayer, you go into meditation, you come out of meditation, and then you move the energies. But what you do is you move the energy up all the way from the bottom, the void. This is my process. I begin in the rubido or the negredo, which is the darkening or the reddening. Right now, the darkening is signifying the feminine aspect of the void. The reddening begins at the base with the red. You pull your energy up through each one of these, taking time to understand within yourself what each significance is, right? This is shadow work. You begin in the base, and I recommend in this book and in person that you spend at least 1 week in each one of these chakras before you proceed to the next one. You should fully investigate in the prayer state after meditation your motivations towards wrath or love, right? To find out if you are truly balanced in that way. Go in and investigate for yourself the things that make you angry. Go in and investigate for yourself the things that make you give affection to other people. There will absolutely be some imbalance along the way. You should take the time to begin to correct yourself before you proceed to the next step. This is important. I cannot stress it enough, and I cannot stop you from being anticipatory and going forward too fast. The only thing I can tell you is that this book is full of warnings, right? Those warnings include going too fast can be detrimental. It is much more effective for you to take the time to fully understand each step. You have the time to get there. This process is not saving you from anything but your own mind, right? There is no save my soul attached to this process whatsoever. But you work through your shadow, going through and acknowledging primarily your vices, right? When you begin this, look at anger, right? Don't really worry about the love. I know I just said to do so. That is more associated with the second step, right? The first step, you move up. You take this dark energy and you pull it up to each one of these places and you identify the darkness within yourself, right? Take a week, right? Take a week per step. Walk it up. I understand. That is 7 weeks. That's less than 2 months and you'll be at the top. And you will be much more likely able to handle the next steps, right? There is a barrier at the third eye. I have described how to do it. We're not going to deal with that today. You're going to have to work around that. This is a point of surrender. That is not really giving anything away. You are going to have to make a decision right here on the way up about continuing in your existence and about submitting your will. Submitting your will to the divine. That is intrinsically important. And then when you get to the crown, then you are getting ready, right? Spend your week, but then you are getting ready to work your way back down the stack. Yes, you have to go both ways. You grab this dark energy and you pull it up. Well, now that you're at the top, you grab this light energy and you pull it down. You go through each one of these steps again and you look at it through the virtues, right? You are unbalanced in one way or the other. That is a guarantee. You're probably unbalanced both ways at the exact same time, which can seem like a conundrum, but you act towards this person different than you do towards that person. You may be giving too much love to someone who does not deserve it. That is a very, very common thing. Or you may be wrathful towards someone who does not deserve it, and those can be two different people at the same time. That is somewhat contradictory, but you're a contradiction until you decide to become balanced. Once you work your way all the way back down the stack, right? You move this dark energy kind of sinuously around these balls, and then you work the light energy kind of sinuously on the other side of them balls. Kind of looks like a caduceus if you are doing it right. But once you have done this part, you're ready for the third piece, right? This is 1, this is 2, now we're on 3. For the third step, you're going to pull those together. You're going to bring this dark energy up to the heart. You're going to bring this light energy down to the heart. And then you're going to push that energy from the heart out into the divine chakra, which is this spirit representative right here. These combinations of things, that is how manifestation works. That is how I have affected physical change in my life. Yes, healing. I think that covers everything. I think that is definitionally pretty much the entire reason why you were here, right? Like, you came here to learn something. Did I not just teach you how to do this? Right? It is that simple. We're 35 minutes and I have just taught you everything that you need to know. Everything that we get from this study that we're about to embark upon, it's going to be confirmation for the things that I just told you. I have not read through this. We have seen some of the references contained in other works. Most primarily Carl Jung's work, The Mysterium Conjunctionis, which we just got done with, where he quoted Dorn quite extensively, and that is one of the reasons why we are here, because Dorn knew this exact same thing that I just told you. He may not have known it and talked about it in the exact same way that I did, but he knew what he was talking about. That was evident simply from the excerpts that were taken from this book and included in a different book. What we just went through in the last 35 minutes, everything you need to know is right there. Right? You go back and watch it again, go back and read through this book is cheap, right? Most of this is available now, right? It was mostly members only, but over the last week I've released all but 2 chapters of this, and I have not gotten leave to release chapter 6 and 7. They have a lot of what we just talked about, however. Like a lot. And so I may wind up releasing those after all. I wanted to lay the groundwork, get the definitions out of the way, because I will be pointing back to this video, right? I always tell people, go back to the Bible study, go back to whatever is relevant. This is going to be the video for alchemy. I feel like I have covered all of the things. Now we can dive into the actual study. All right, so what we got here is Mr. Elias Ashmole. This is the preamble. It is a little bit long. We will probably be here for another hour or so. I'm going to blow through this fairly quickly. He may know what he is talking about. If so, we will probably stop. But the main meat of this is going to be the things that come after the introduction, which is what this is, the preamble or prologue or however he termed it. This is just setting the stage for the further studies. This is kind of a continuation of what I just did. Mr. Ashmole had a life that was... There are points that are worth discussing, right? And normally that's what we do in this, but because this is not his work, right? This is a compilation of other people's work. We're going to let it ride without going into the wiki, right? This would be 3 hours long if we went into the wiki. But you are more than welcome to check him out for yourself. His name will be linked. It is Elias Ashmole. All right, so to the text. Let's see. Yeah, that'll work. All right. All ingenuously elaborate students in the most divine mysteries of Hermetic learning. One thing to note about this. Yeah, we'll pick up. One thing to note about this, right? You see right here, it says Mythultries. This F right here in the middle, this little part right here, that's actually an S. This is Old English. There's going to be a lot of that. If I make some misinterpretations along the way, give me a little bit of grace. I am not great at pronunciations for all of the things either, so give me a little bit of grace with that as well. All right. The most divine mysteries of Hermetic learning. The subject of this ensuing work is a philosophical account of that eminent secret treasured up in the bosom of nature, which hath been fought for by many, but found by a few, notwithstanding experienced antiquity hath afforded faithful, though not frequent, discoveries thereof. Oh yeah. One of the problems that we have discovered along the way is that not everybody had good information, right? well, I should have hit this before, but there are several bad works out there that you can use as a reference. One that most people would be familiar with in this area is going to be Dogma and Ritual, right? I can't pull up his name right now, right? He is that insignificant. But there wasn't a whole lot in that study. We did the study. There wasn't a whole lot of value there. Aleister Crowley with Liber 4, another one that people will be very familiar with, had no idea at all what he was talking about. Cornelius Agrippa, which is probably going to be a reference for some of this, also had no idea what he was talking about. What he did, Cornelius, was basically what Mr. Ashmole did, was consolidate other people's works, but he didn't bother to fact check it at all. He didn't bother to experiment with it at all. And there were some severe problems with any of the execution of the things that he was talking about. It was so bad that we had to quit the discussion. So there are bad references. Some of these might be that. I feel like he has probably given us some good in this. But another one that many people take for granted is Paracelsus. There is no real reason to believe that Paracelsus had the divine experience at all. That is a problem in this. There is no way to separate the divine from the spiritual alchemy. If you don't believe in the divine, you will receive no benefit from this whatsoever. If you are attached necessarily to the divines that are defined, right? If you call upon a particular name for God, for instance, or if you are attributed with any of the control systems, you are also going to have some problems. The control systems were created simply to keep you from what you can do. I know that definitely steps on toes, but I really don't care. Right? Again, fall back to the Bible study. And by what I mean by control systems, it is anything that is created to put restrictions upon you, right? To guardrails to keep you in line. You can definitely find that in Judaism and Christianity, right? These are the things that you cannot cross. Some of them are good, right? You shouldn't kill people without reason. But some of them are bad, right? You should not give away all that you own. You should not abstain from sex except for very short periods of time for specific purposes. Fasting. There is nothing intrinsically good about denying sex. There are several problems, in fact, with doing so. And so a lot of the source material may be a little bit corrupted, right? If they comes from somewheres where they were in a sex denial cult, that will be prevalent in the writings, and that is completely wrong. And so has afforded faithful, though not frequent. That is true. I mean, there's a lot of bad information. There's some good information. You can go back to Plato. Plato had some great information. That's part of this playlist, the ancient lore. There's also some very bad. And so just bear that in mind as we go through. It's one of the reasons why we do this. The ones that do find it is not frequent, right? And the ones that do find it and record it are less frequent than that. All right. Past ages have, like rivers, conceived down to us upon the float the more light and sophistical pieces of learning. But what were profound and mysterious, the weight and solidity thereof, sunk to the bottom, whence everyone who attempts to dive cannot easily fetch them up. So that what our Savior said to his disciples may, I hope without offense, be spoken to the elected sons of the art. Now, this is that couching in language that we were talking about at the time of Mr. Ashmole, which I believe was in the 1400s. Right? I can be wrong. I'm willing to be corrected on dates for sure. In the 1400s was definitely in the middle of people dying for their beliefs. And if you were talking about any of the things that I talk about in here, getting your head cut off would be merciful, right? They were more likely to catch you on fire or tie you between some horses or various torture devices, right? That is a very real reality for these people. And so for the ones that did discover, they had to couch their language in the current vernacular of their time, which was Christianity. Christianity did not play nice. I mean, it spread by the sword. Do not make any mistake about that. And so when he's talking about, so what our Savior said to his disciples, and then he puts in here, I hope without offense. I mean, that is trying to make sure that you understand that he's really aligned with the church. Unto you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to others in parables, that seeing they may not see, and hearing they may not understand. That is true. How many people have read the parable of the prodigal son and think that it's about the son? Our English philosophers, generally, like prophets, have received little honor, unless that hath been privately paid them in their own country. Nor have they done any mighty works among us, except in covertly administering their medicine to a few sick and healing them. For greater experiments than what is performed in psychic, they never publicly show of. Then again, that goes back to you will die. Like even today, if you tell somebody that you healed yourself through faith, even if you say that it was through Jesus Christ, there's going to be people that disbelieve that heartily. And this is a major caveat, most of those will be in the church of that person. They will tell you straight, oh, no, that's not possible. You didn't cure cancer through faith. What's wrong with you? Thus did Io, one of the first four followers of the Rosicrucians, Fratres Rosicruci. We have dealt with some Rosicrucian ideas. We've dealt with some Masonic ideas. It does not appear that either the Masons or the Masonics, or the Masons or the Rosicrucians actually knew things, right? The things that I talk about. Some of them did. Obviously, Dorn was a Mason, and he was, but Mr. Ashmole was also a Mason. Thus did Io in curing the young Earl of Norfolk of the leprosy, and Dr. B in carrying off the virulency of the smallpox twice from Queen Elizabeth, insomuch that they never appeared. But in parts abroad they have found more noble reception, and the world, greedy of obeying their words, may, rather than want the fight thereof, continue to view them through a translation, though never so imperfect. Witness what Marius, Hermanus, Cambiacus, Faber, and many others have done, the first of which came out in Germany to live in England, purposely that he might to understand our English tongue, as to translate Norton's Ordinal into Latin verse, which most judiciously and learned he did. Yet, to our shame, be it spoken, his entertainment was too coarse for so deserving a scholar. How great a blemish is it then to us that refuse to read so famous authors in our natural language, while strangers are necessitated to read them in ours, to understand them in their own, yet think the dignity of the subject much more deserving than their pains. If this we do but ingeniously consider, we may judge it more of a reason than we look back upon, than neglect such pieces of learning as are natives of our own country. And by this inquisition find no nation hath written more or better, although at present, as well through our own supineness as the decrees of fate, few of their works can be found. John Leland took very much pains, even at the yielding up of the ghost of our English learning, to preserve its latest but weakest cause, almost spent breath, and from him John Bale with John Pitts, who indeed is but Bale's plagiary, hath left us a catalogue of the writers of this nation, and that's never all, near all. Yet posterity for this is deeply obliged. What punishment did their pestilent malice deserve, who robbed us of their whole works? See the Catholic Church. I mean, one of the major problems with Catholicism is their intrinsic greed and their need to absolutely control all sources of information that might be contradictory to them. there is a vast store of knowledge contained in the vaults underneath the Vatican, which nobody ever gets to see. A judicious author, speaking of the dissolution of our monasteries, saith thus: many manuscripts, guilty of no other superstition than red letters on the front, were condemned to the fire, and here a principal key of antiquity was lost to the great prejudice of posterity. Indeed, such was learning's misfortune at that great devastation of our English libraries, that where a red letter or a mathematical diagram appeared, they were sufficient to entitle the book to be popish or diabolical, which would be the same thing. Popish and diabolical are definitely synonyms. It is funny that it's talking about superstition with red letters being a problem, and there are people who have problems with the red letter Bible. When in actuality, if you actually pay attention to only the red letters, you will be mostly okay. Our English nation hath ever been happy for learning and learned men, and to illustrate this, I hope it will not prove difficult. As first, the Druids, the famous and mysterious Druids, that were priests, diviners, and wise men, and took their original name from Druceronius, the fourth king of the Celts. That is new information to me. Styled Sapentium and Augurium Doctor, who died Anno Mundi 2069. How is it Anno Mundi 2069? Anno Mundi is the year of now? I mean, the year of life? That is most definitely, like, this was written, I believe, in the 1400s. Right? It might have been the 1600s, but either way, that is, right, we're not at 2069 in AD. What is Anno Mundi? I'm not positive. Next, the Bard, who celebrated the illustrious deeds of famous men, which they ingeniously disposed in heroic verse, and sung them to the sweet melody of the harp, amongst other testimonies, here to receive chaussees. The old gentle Britons in her days of diverse annuities made large, expand, this is really tough to read, expands in her mother tongue, where lays with her instruments they sung. Sorry, that is, there's something, like, I don't even know what this is right here. It's not going to let me highlight it. Oh well. These philosophers had their name from Bardus Druidus, the fifth king of the Celts, who was the first inventor of verse, as Borephilus tells us, and died Annus Mundi 2138. Neither of these sects of philosophers used any writing. Indeed, it was not lawful, for such was the policy and curiosity of elder ages, to defend their learning and mysteries from the injury of ignorant interpretations, that they delivered them to posterity by tradition only. And that is why they're mostly lost. Right? We have existent several references to works that are no longer to be found. Now, some of those may very well be contained in the Vatican. Some of them may have actually been lost in a fire. Some of them may be in private collections wherever they happen to be. But we don't have some of them, right? Some of them were never written down, right? The Pythagorean cult didn't write anything about themselves. Other people wrote about them. That is true for a lot of those cults. A lot of them never relayed their information in written form. It was only to be conveyed from the master to the next master at the moment or the imminence of death. And the problem with that is that you lose things through sudden death, right? Stroke, heart attack, cataclysmic accident, suddenly the knowledge no longer exists. That appears to be what happened to the Masons. That appears to be what happened to the Rosicrucians. Now, I say both of those with the full caveat that I am not either one of them. My only knowledge of them comes through the things that they have said about themselves. We have done several works where they talked about themselves. I forget who it was, but it became apparent through one of the studies by a Mason that the Masons perform ceremonial magic with no real understanding of it and no real intention that it is real, which is stupid, right? If you are going to perform ritual magic, you better believe in it. You better understand it fully. Like 100% understand every single step along the way. Do not perform somebody else's ritual simply because it is an initiation process. That is dumb. You are giving energy to something. You better fucking understand what it is. But that is a major problem, right? We have lost information because of not writing it down. Caesar testifies, and 'tis a noble testimony, that the learning of the Druids was first invented in Britain, and thence transferred into France, and that in all his time those of France came over hither to be instructed. Agricola, in Tacitus, refers the Britons before the students of France, notwithstanding that they were of docile wit and apt to learn, and that they were curious, entertaining the eloquence of the Latin tongue. As for magic, Pliny tells us it flourished in Britain, and that the people there were so devoted to it, yea, with all the complements of ceremony, a man would think that even the Persian learned this magic thence. That is an interesting reference for sure. I mean, a German poet says that when the world was troubled with Pannonic innovations, England flourished in the knowledge of all good arts, and was able to send her learned men into other countries to propagate learning. And instances Winifred, Elias Boniface the Devonshire man, and Willibrord the northern man, that were sent into Germany. Nay, more, England was twice schoolmistress to France. For so saith Peter Ramus, vis-a-vis, first by the Druids, who taught them their discipline, and afterwards by Alcunius in Charles the Great's time, though whole persuasions the emperor founded the University of Paris. For the Saxons, it is not to be denied that many of them, after their conversion to Christianity, were exceedingly learned, and before that, much admitted to soothsaying, southsaying, augury, divination, by the neighing of horses, etc. And 'tis worthy the inquiry, there being more in it than we ordinarily apprehend, why they in general worshipped Herthis, the dame Earth, for a goddess, and honored Mercury above all the gods of the Germans, whom they called Woden, hence Wodenday, now Wednesday. For they believed that this dame Herthis intermediated in humane affairs and relieved the poor, whose image was armed, standing among flowers, having in his right hand a staff, and in it a banner, wherein was painted a rose, in the other hand a balance, and upon the head thereof a cock, on the breast a carved bear, and before the middle a fixed scutcheon, in chief whereof was also a balance, in face a lion, and in point a rose. And for their god Woden, they esteemed him as their god of battle, representing him an armed man, insomuch that we to this very day retain the word wood among us to signify fierce, furious, raging. As when one is in a great rage, we usually say he is wood. Really. Languages evolve over time. So the Mercury of the philosophers is shadowed under the fierce and terrible names of lion, dragon, Poifon, etc. But this is not all, though it be something. I mean, we talked before that Mercury is definitely one of the representatives. It is the representative of soul, and it is not going to be the lion, the dragon, or the python, which I think that Poifon was supposed to mean. And now, to come yet nearer to ourselves, we must needs say that the latter times, since the conquest, our nation hath produced such famous and eminently learned men as have equaled, if not surpassed, the great scholars of other nations, and happy were we if now we could but partake of those legacies they left, and which envy and ignorance have defrauded us of. I would say malice. Howsoever, the small remainder which is left, we have good reason to prize. For out of old fields, as men faith, cometh all this new come for years to peers, and out of old books in good faith come all this science that men learn. That England hath become successively enriched with such men, our country John Leland, and I never heard he was partial, abundantly testifies, who avers that generally we have had such a great number of excellent wits and writers, learned with the best as time served, who besides their knowledge in the four tongues, in which part of them excelled, there was no liberal science or any feat concerning learning, in which they were not showed certain arguments of great felicity and wit, and thus much for the generality of learning. Now, for a particular account of the Hermetic science, vouchsafe, ingenious reader, to accept the ensuing collections, not yet so, as if therein were contained all the works of our English Hermetic philosophers, for far more are designed in a second part to follow and complete this full theatrum, to which a God allowing me further time and tranquillity to run through it, as I have already this, I intend shortly to make ready for the preface, whereby yet more manifest that men have had no less famous for this kind of philosophy than for all other commendable arts and sciences. I am unaware if he finished the second volume. If you know, let me know. When we get to the end of this, I will be looking it up. I'm not going to bother doing it now, but if there is a second volume, I am very interested in that. To add anything to the praise thereof, we were but to hold a candle before the sun, or should I here deliver a full account of the marvelous operations and effects thereof, it would be far beyond the limits of a preface, as remote from the beliefs of the generality of the world, nor do I expect that all my readers should come with an engagement to believe what I here write, or that there was ever any such thing in rerum natura, as what we call a philosopher's stone, nor will I persuade them to it, though I must tell them I have not the vanity to publish these sacred and serious mysteries and arcana as romances. 'Tis enough that I knew incredulity is given to the world as a punishment. Yet I'll tell them what one of our ancient poetical philosophers says. I'm going to point out here before we get to the ancient poetical philosopher, because I'm not sure that I hit it, and I sure meant to. I mean, when I began this, I meant to say, and I don't think that I did, that there are two types of alchemy. Right? I did. Okay, there's physical chemical alchemy, where you are taking substances and creating things from them. And then there is an internal spiritual alchemy. Those are two completely different things. And by that I mean, it is my understanding that first there was the understanding of the spiritual, and because of a somewhat misguided attribution of there is a correlation in all instances, as above so below, that because we were able to do this internally, that there must be something external to do. Right? That was the search for the corporeal philosopher's stone, because the ones who had made the internal one, which is the heart, we talked about that, right? The green one. That is a process of refinement, pulling up and down, creating the stone which allows manifestation. Because of that process, which is the whitening, the albedo, the darkening, and the reddening, and all of that is involved in it, because of that process, they had the misguided understanding that there had to be a philosopher's stone that was able to be created external from themselves. There is no good reason to believe that, and that's what he is talking about here, right? That none has been made, As far as we know, nobody has made a physical philosopher's stone. Several people, myself included, have made the spiritual one. Alright, now to the ancient poetical philosophers. If you will listen to me lay, something thereby you may find that may content your mind. I will not swear to make you give credence, for a philosopher will find here an evidence of the truth. And to men that be lay, I will not greatly what they say. I skill not greatly what they say, or I must profess to know enough to hold my tongue, but not enough to speak, and no less recall the miraculous fruits I have found in my diligent inquiry into these arcana. Lead me on to such degrees of admiration, they command silence and force me to lose my tongue. I am in the exact opposite position, right? This paragraph right here lets me know something. Mr. Ashmole actually made the stone, right? Throughout antiquity, for the most part, those who have made the stone have been led to not reveal too much about it. I am in the exact opposite position. Now, I do not understand why. This was not necessarily something that I seeked out, but it is something, right? I am here to fully and clearly as possible to explain these things. As clearly and as fully as I possibly can. That is why we began this video with those 35 minutes of me giving definitions. That is this process in short, right? It is a longer process. There is more involved. I am sure I forgot pieces along the way, but that is the overall. I am compelled to do these things, much to my own detriment in many cases. And that is just me following where the Spirit leads me. I really don't have a choice. I do, right? I could deny it. I could not do this, but that is not my highest timeline. And so I am in a completely new position as far as I am aware. So, back to the text. Yet, as one greatly affecting my native country and the satisfaction of all ingenious artists, I have published, for their use, these ensuing collected antiquities, and shall here lay something more here than they speak of. He who shall have the happiness to meet with S. Dumpton's work, The Occulta Philosophia, a book which EGAI made much use of, and which shall chiefly back what I here am about to say, may therein read such stories as will make him amazed to think what stupendous and immense things are to be performed by virtue of the philosopher's mercury. It's actually the sulfur, not the mercury. This is one of those misunderstandings, of which a taste only and no more. And first, of the mineral stone, to which is wrought up to the degree only that hath the power of transmuting any imperfect earthly matter into its utmost degree of perfection. That is, to convert the basest of metals into perfect gold and silver. Flints into all matter of precious stones, as rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and diamonds, and many more experiments of like nature. As far as I am aware, none of them achieved any of this. Now, that comes with a caveat. We, humanity, have. In the last decade, we have managed to transmute 3 elements into something else. We transmuted bismuth first. Bismuth is the thing that is involved in Pepto-Bismol. It is a semi-chromatic element. It has a lot of different things to it. It is one of the metals, and we, through electromagnetic bombardment, was able to alter the atomic structure of this primary element into gold. We did that. It was an enormous energy sink. It was through electromagnetic bombardment. I wonder if maybe that is important to things. But we also did it to lead and I can never remember the third one, but there is a third one, right? It was bismuth, lead, and I can't remember, but there were three. We have done this. That is published studies, right? This is not speculative at all. This is firmly established, well known. Well, maybe not well known, but it's known in the circles of people who are interested. That is something that we have done, but it was not through the use of a philosopher's stone, right? Now, it was through the use of the spirit. Spirit is electricity. It was electromagnetic bombardment. That is the manipulation of the electromagnetics. Now, they did that through technology. I do that internally through will. I believe that it is possible to do so, but it is extreme, or to do so externally, right? You probably can change lead into gold, but it is probably intrinsically dangerous to do so. It is almost definitely not going to be worth the effort, and there may actually be spiritual repercussions to doing so. It would, after all, be associated with greed. And so there are very good reasons not to. If you would like a list of those reasons, I have a video that is the 8 laws of creation. You should check that out. They are related to physics. All right. And that is transforming metals into gold. As far as I'm aware, we have not done so to silver. Flints into all manner of precious stones is going to be a significant problem. Flint is constructed from not the same things, right? Diamonds are the perfection of carbon. I believe that rubies are the perfection of silicon, right? That is the 8-point process. There is a designation process. There's another video. That video is the fundamental harmonics of life. That is another very good key video. There are 8 ways to classify stones. It goes from amorphous, which is just simply means that there is no real crystalline structure, right? It is pretty close to source. And it goes up to diamonds or rubies or gold, right? I have my gold here. Those are the perfections. They are 8-sided cubics. They are the perfections thereof. As far as I'm aware, though, they are not comprised of the same materials as flint. I have not done an exhaustive study of that, so I cannot speak with any degree of certainty. But rubies and diamonds for sure are perfections. I think that emeralds and sapphires are as well, but they may be step 7 and not 8. All right. And many experiments of like nature. But as this is but a part, so it is the least share of that blessing, which may be acquired by the philosopher's materia, if the full virtue thereof were known. Gold, I confess, is a delicious object, a goodly light, which we admire and gaze upon at Puri and Junonis Avum. But as to make gold, faith is an incomparable author, is the chiefest intent of the alchemist, so it was scarce any intent of the ancient philosophers, and the lowest use of the adapti made of this materia. There was a part that I missed in this process, right? When you are doing this process of pulling up, there will be a light that will reveal itself to you. It is golden. That is significant in context of what we just read, right? There is a gold that you make, not this yellow of the solar plexus, but a shining, radiant, lustrous, metallic-looking gold. It will unfold. There is another video, right? The introduction to the unfolding of the secret of the golden flower. That is a good study if you were interested in these things. There was a lot of meat contained in the golden flower. We talked about this in some extensive detail there. But there is gold that will reveal itself to you. It is not physical, however. For they, being lovers of wisdom more than worldly wealth, drove at higher and more excellent operations. And certainly he to whom the whole court of nature lays open rejoices not so much that he can make gold and silver, or the devils to become subject to him, as that he sees the heavens open and the angels of God ascending and descending, and that his own name is fairly written in the book of life. All right, here is another confirmation. I mean, he is telling those who know something right here. Right? I told you, there is spiritual alchemy. That is what is being talked about right here. That spiritual alchemy, part of this process, right about the third eye, there is a experience, right? There is the submittal. There is the willingness to not return. That is intrinsic to the experience. Do not make a mistake about that. Understand that if you are going to do this. But once you take those steps and you do get an experience, that experience is going to be what is referred to as the throne room experience. What happens, right? What happened for me is I was pulled out of my body. I got to see the unfolding of the creation. I saw quite literally the void, and then the light, and then the accretion of all of the matters, and then I got to see the interconnectedness of all things, including humanity. I used to be a racist, right? We're going to go ahead and put that out there. I've talked about this several times before. I grew up in ignorance. I am from South Louisiana. I came from East Feliciana Parish, and there's a lot of it there. That experience took that from me entirely. I know that's a big statement. You don't have to believe me. I don't care. I'm here to tell you, not to convince you. That experience, the throne room experience, brought to me the understanding that God created every single person on the planet with intention, and therefore no single person upon the planet is better than any other person upon the planet. There is an understanding that comes from this experience that I cannot relate to you in the slightest way. I can tell you about it, I just did. That does not convey the awesomeness of it. That does not convey at all the immensity of that experience. It is something that I do recommend, and you probably will not get there. You might. I hope you do. I pray you do. That is the entire reason we do these studies. But most people do not have the dedication. If you do, you are one of the select few. I don't like that. I would like it to be a different. I am actively manifesting different, but as of now, it is not that way. Most people will never attain this throne room experience. But he did. And you can tell because of what he says right here, right? It's not about making the gold and silver or the devils to become a subject, but instead, as that he sees the heavens open. That part right there lets me know all I need to know. Now, these angels of God ascending and descending, that is his experience with that. I did not have that experience. There were no external entities attached, right? I felt like I was being held. I didn't see any hands. I heard a voice. I did not see any entity. That voice was internal. It was not even external to me. I have had an angelic experience. I do believe in angels. That was not the same experience at all. Not even close. And so his expression, one of the problems with prophecy that we talk about quite often is you can only understand things according to what you know. His understanding is intrinsically related to God and the angels as defined by the church. And so that is what he saw. That is how he interpreted what he saw, and there is nothing wrong with that, right? I don't believe that the understanding that you receive from the Holy Bible is a full one, but it can get you there. All right. Now, this last part, the name written in the book of life, that is entirely giving in to the Christian viewpoint, which doesn't have a real reason to exist. Next, to come to the vegetable, magical, and angelical stones, to which have in them no part of the mineral stone, cortinus that stone, fermented with metalline and earthly nature. For they are marvelously subtle, and each of them differing in operation and nature, because fitted and fermented for feverol effects and purposes. Doubtless, Adam, with the fathers before the flood and since, Abraham, Moses, and Solomon wrought many wonders by them. There is no reason to believe that. Yet the utmost of their virtues they never fully understood, nor indeed any but God, the maker of all things in heaven and earth, blessed forevermore. This, again, is that couching in language. Now, I have done a Bible study. It is rather unconventional. Many people do not appreciate it whatsoever. I do not care. There is no reason to believe that Moses ever actually existed. There was no one to record the beginning. I use it as a reference. Before the beginning there was a God, right? That is a reference to the Bible, but it is definitely changing that reference because that reference is flawed. When John said in the beginning there was the Word and the Word was with God, he was talking about Jesus. That was wrong. That is a complete misunderstanding of the Logos. There is no reason to believe that Moses wrote the Bible, right? The best possible attribution that can be given is that he did, right? The first 5 books, right? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That is the best attribution, but there is no real reason to believe that that happened at all. I understand, yes, it is written that way in that book, but there are very significant reasons not to believe it. There is no reason to believe that Abraham had a good understanding of anything at all for the entirety of his life. And the same is true for Solomon. And if any of that is confusing to you, to save on time, I would refer you to the appropriate sections. If you are looking for Abraham, check out Genesis. If you are looking for Moses and why he was not an example, Exodus and Leviticus. If you are looking for Solomon, Kings and Chronicles, we have talked about that very extensively. All right. 4. By the vegetable may be perfectly known the nature of man, beast, fowls, fishes, together with all kinds of trees, plants, flowers, etc., and how to produce and make them grow, flourish, and bear fruit. How to increase them in color and smell, and when and where we please. And all of this not only at an instant experiment gratia, but daily, monthly, yearly, at any time, at any season, yea, in the depth of winter. And therefore, not unlike but the walnut tree which anciently grew in Glastonbury churchyard and never put forth leaves before St. Barnaby's day, yet then was fully loaded with them, as also the hawthorn there, so greatly famed for shooting forth leaves and flowers at Christmas, together with the oak and New Forest in Hampshire, that bore green leaves at the same season. May be some experiments made of the vegetable stone. Besides the masculine part of it, which is wrought up to a solar quality, and I am in exact agreement with that, the masculine is the white, which is the solar quality, the infinitesimal point that penetrates. And through its exceeding heat, again in agreement, will burn up and destroy any creature, plant, etc. That which is lunar and feminine, if immediately applied, will mitigate it with extreme cold. And, in like manner, the lunar quality benumbs and congeals any animal, etc., unless it be presently helped and resolved by that of the sun. For though they are both made out of one natural substance, yet in working they have contrary qualities. Nevertheless, there is such a natural affiliance between them, that one cannot do, the other both can and will perform. Nor are their inward virtues more than their outward beauties, for the solar part is of a resplendent, transparent luster, that the eye of man is scarce able to endure it. And if the lunar part be exposed abroad in a dark night, birds will repair to and circulate about it, as a fly around a candle, and submit themselves to the captivity of the hand. And this invites me to believe that the stone which the ancient Hermes, then being 140 years old, took out of the wall of his cell and showed Cornelius Gallus, that cannot be the same Hermes, maybe that was Hermet, and 1602, was of the nature of the vegetable stone. For, upon the opening of the golden box, wherein it was enclosed, It dilated its beams all over the room, and that with so great splendor that it overcame the light that was kindled therein. Besides, the hermit refused to project upon it metal, as being unworthy of it, but made his experiment upon veronica and rue. By the magical or perspective stone, it is possible to discover any person in what part of the world whatever, although never so secretly concealed or hid in chambers, closets, or caverns of the earth. For there it makes a strict inquisition. In a word, it fairly presents to your view even the whole world, wherein to behold, hear, or see your desire. That sounds an awful lot like dowsing, which is something that I do play with. I say play with, I am making a profession out of it. Nay, more, it enables man to understand the language of the creatures, as the chirping of birds, loving a beast, etc., to convey a spirit into an image, which, by observing the influence of heavenly bodies, shall become a true oracle. And yet, this is, as EA assures you, not any ways necromantical or devilish, but easy, wondrously easy, natural, and honest. I brought up the dowsing, right? This is divination. This is trying to find something, right? Whether that be a lost object or water, which is some of the more common appellations, or whether that is electromagnetic energies, which is what I am using it for mostly. There is a belief put about by the control system that it is devilish, right? Even my own dad, when I said I was going to be picking up dowsing, he said, "You know that's black magic, right?" I was like, says the blood cult, right? These people who sacrificed a person for their sins. Yeah, okay, I'm going to listen to their moral judgments. Really? There is nothing intrinsically evil about this. This is simply using the electromagnetic forces of creation, which is the Holy Spirit. Lastly, as touching the angelical stone, it is so subtle, saith the aforesaid author, that it can be neither be seen, felt, or weighed, but tasted only. The voice of man, which bears some proportion to these subtle properties, comes short in comparison. Nay, the air itself is not so penetrable, and yet, O mysterious wonder, a stone that will lodge in the fire to eternity without being prejudiced. It hath a divine power, celestial and invisible, above the rest, and endows the possessor with divine gifts. It affords the apparition of angels, and gives the power of conversing with them by dreams and revelations. Nor dare any evil spirit approach the place where it lodgeth, because it is a quintessence wherein there is no corruptible thing, and where the elements do not corrupt, no devil can stay or abide. That is the fulfillment, right? You have the pulling up and the pulling down and the creation of the stone, which allows you to expand the as below and the as above in concurrence with each other through the heart into the divine. This stone, that is the divine aura. And I say that because of this last part, right? Nor dare any evil spirit approach the place. If you have properly balanced yourself, you don't have to worry about those spirits anymore. You don't have to worry about any entity whatsoever. If you are properly balanced, nobody can perform emotional alchemy upon you. I have a feeling that somebody has been trying around here. That is a bad idea. I mean, I've seen the evidence of the attempt. It is a bad idea to attempt to do any energy work negatively towards me. That is an exceptionally bad idea. I can't tell you necessarily not to do it, but I can tell you that it is not recommended. S. Dunstan calls it the food of the angels. And that is true as well. If you are properly balanced, you feed entities, whether you want to do that or not, right? There is an entity associated with lust. There is an entity associated with wrath. There is one associated with gluttony. If you are living in these vices, you are feeding those entities. There are entities associated with love. There is an entity associated with chastity. There is an entity associated with denial. If you are performing those things, you are feeding that entity. There is an entity associated with kindness. There is an entity associated with sacred union. There is an entity associated with moderation. If you are balanced, you are partaking of that, and that entity is rather neutral. It denies the evil entities. Now, the ones that feed off of the virtues, they are mostly good, but not entirely so. Relying too far upon the virtues is just as bad as being consumed by the vices. Right? Denying sex, that is not a good thing. You were created to procreate. It is part of your divine purpose here on the planet for almost everybody. Not everybody, but almost. You are not meant to never eat sugar or to only eat meat. That is an imbalance. It is not necessarily evil, but it is not beneficial to you. Right? You can be consumed with the idea that if you don't eat meat, you're better than other people. That might be tied to pride, right? I'm better than you because I deny myself this thing. That's pride, right? You should be able to deny yourself anything for a brief period of time. And by brief, it can be somewhat extended. 40 days is a good one for some people. You should be able to deny these things for yourself for the purpose of achieving spiritual goals. But it is not them that actually allows you to do that. It is the willingness to do it. That's what allows you to do it. That brings you into the balance. If you are leaning into your virtues, you are doing it wrong. And that is not to say don't be virtuous, right? But again, there's also the I am virtuous and so I will receive rewards later. That is pride as well. And greed. That's a big deal, right? If you are, I'm going to give away all that I own here on the planet so that I can have a ton of rewards of golden streets and gems. That is greed. That is greed hiding as charity. Just saying. And so it is the food of the angels. Angels and entities are an interchangeable thing. Angels, demons, genies, entities. Now there are entities that are not on that same level. The angels are on the 7th plane of existence. There are entities that are above us on the 6th plane of existence, but they don't have the understanding that the 7th plane does. We're on the 5th plane. Dogs and the trainable animals are on the 4th plane. The animals that can't be trained are on the 3rd plane. The plants are on the 2nd plane, and the individual elements are on the 1st plane of existence. The 8th plane is the return to the divine, the source from which we all came. There are entities that feed on every single energy that is released. You get to choose which entities that you feed. I choose to feed the entities of balance. You can choose to feed whoever you want. And by others, it is termed the heavenly Britannicum. The tree of life. There is a tree, right? That is signified here as well. This is the trunk. This is the roots. This is the canopy. This is the entire tree. And is undoubtedly, next under God, the Alchemical, or giver of years. For by it man's body is preserved from corruption, being thereby enabled to live a long time without food. Nay, 'tis made a question whether any man can die that uses it. You can. It is not a question. Right? One of the things that I am here to clarify is that you are not meant to be eternal. There is no part of this process whatsoever that guarantees your eternality. Spiritually, you are already an eternal spiritual being having a human experience in 5D space. And there is no part of this whatsoever that is going to allow you in corporeality to remain alive forever, right? You can extend your life to a great extent. Intrinsic to this process, you have to exercise regularly, you have to eat well, you have to hydrate, and you have to sleep. Those 4 keys are the keys to longevity. This process, you cannot deny exercise. If you are not exercising, you are not on the path. If you are consuming things that are no good for you to excess, you are not on the path. That does not mean that you cannot have ice cream or a Snickers bar, right? You can consume things that are not good for you. But if your whole meal consists of nothing but Snickers bars, you are doing it wrong. You will not get the benefits. You should be eating good food close to source so that you can fuel your body appropriately. That is the choice of moderation. And so there are things intrinsic to this that cannot be separated from it that will bring you a long life. But it will not be forever. There is no part of this process which will allow you to live forever here. Right? Your soul is already eternal. It's already going to go back to God. It ain't got nothing to do with that. Alright. Man can die that uses it, which I do not so much admire as to think why the possessors of it should desire to live, that have those manifestations of glory and eternity presented unto their fleshly eyes. And that again is the language of the church, right? I am in no hurry to go home. I have glimpsed eternity in my estimation. I don't claim that it is truth, but it is to me, right? I have glimpsed where we go. It is a wonderful place. It is peace and contentment. It is full understanding of the entire experience. But I'm not in a hurry to get there. I will get there at the appropriate time. There is no need for that, and most of that thinking that there is victim mentality. I'm suffering here, therefore it is a prison planet, so I should have to overcome it. Well, you're suffering here because you choose to suffer, right? For the most part, life is a pleasant experience. It has unpleasant parts. See the origin story. If that is confusing to you, I again do not speak idly. But overwhelmingly, life is a pleasant experience. You live, you love, you grow, you laugh. That is the best part of it, and that is the most part of it. You laugh, you cry, you hurt. That is true, but that is not the purpose of it. This, right, manifestations of glory and eternity, and I should desire to be there. That is putting off the appreciation for the life that God has given you. God put you here right now for a reason. You do not exist for no reason. You are here at the direct will of God. He individualized his soul so that you could be here. You should try and do something here. You should try and accomplish here instead of there. Now, that doesn't mean chase the world, right? But it does mean that you have something to accomplish here. And that the goal should be for here, not for there. But rather desire to be dissolved and to enjoy the full fruition, than live where they must be content with the bar of speculation. After Hermes had once obtained the knowledge of this stone, he gave over the use of all other stones, and therein only delighted Moses and Solomon, and therein only delighted. Pause. Moses and Solomon, together with Hermes, were the only three that excelled in the knowledge thereof, and who therewith wrought wonders. Prove that. Prove it. Prove that. Right? I'm going to take contention here because there is no good reason to believe that Solomon had a good understanding of anything. I know people say that he was the wisest man ever. He wrote the book of Proverbs. Yeah, well, he kind of didn't. Right? What does it tell you in the book of Proverbs about Solomon? He collected the works of wise men. Well, that is wise, but it is not his wisdom. Right? What does it tell you in the book of Ecclesiastes? That he made every mistake that is possible for a man to make, and he was kind of unrepentant about it. That is a severe problem. He was not balanced in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. There is significant reason to doubt that he even existed. Moses is a whole different ball of wax. I do recommend that you fall to the book of Exodus and Leviticus, even Deuteronomy. There is a lot of problems with Moses, like a lot of problems, and again, there is no real reason to believe that he actually existed either. So, there is, however, reason to believe that Hermes did. That there is a gift of prophecy hid in the red stone. Races will tell you, for thereby, saith he, philosophers have foretold things to come, and Petrus Bonus avers that they did prophesy not only generally but specially, having a foreknowledge of the resurrection, incarnation of Christ, day of judgment, and that the world should be consumed with fire, and this not otherwise than from the inside of their operations. All right, let's step on toes. Nobody prophesied the foreknowledge of the incarnation of Christ. There was no prophecy of a virgin birth. Once again, I will refer you to the Bible study. Go to the book of Isaiah, the relevant passage. I think it's around chapter 35. There was a prophecy that was given. This is it. Isaiah, the prophet, said to the king, he said, "Give me the prophecy that you would like to see." And the king said, "No, you are not to tempt the Lord your God." And so the prophet Isaiah said, "Okay, I will give you one." He said, "This maiden right here," and he specified who it would be, not virgin, but maiden. Go back and do the word study. This maiden right here, she's going to get pregnant. And she's going to give birth. And before that child is old enough to be eating cheese, the Babylonians are going to come and they're going to take you into captivity. And it happened exactly like that. Down to the naming of the child. It happened exactly as it was prophesied. There was no part of that where it was a virgin. None. As a matter of fact, in order to make sure that the prophecy took place, Isaiah himself married and impregnated this young maiden. That is in the book. What is not in the book is that there would be a virgin birth by which you would be saved from your sin. That is not in the book. As a matter of fact, if you go back, as I have done, and you read through the Old Testament, you will discover something that is quite eye-opening. There is no reference to hell. There is no burning eternal torment for your sins. That is non-existent in the Old Testament. There is Sheol, which is the land of the dead, but everybody goes there. There is a heaven in which God resides, but you don't go there. That is what the Old Testament says. It was changed in the New Testament, created pretty much wholesale, if not derived from the Hindu beliefs, that there was an eternal punishment awaiting you. That is not in the Old Testament at all. That is some of the problems, right? Again, see the Bible study for much more extensive. Like I definitely break it down. And so this is not true. Simply not true. There is no prophecy of a resurrection. There is no prophecy of the incarnation of Christ. There is not really a day of judgment, with a caveat. There is, however, a cycle that occurs upon this planet with somewhat regular occurrence. It is a 12,000 year cycle with a half cycle, right? And what that means is, at 12,000 years, there is a fire event, right? Then 6,000 years later, there is a water event. And then 6,000 years later, there is another fire event. And then, 6,000 years after that, there is another water event. That is a 12,000 year interval between the fire and 12,000 years between the water and water. But the halfway point is the opposite. That source material is Plato, Critias, and Timaeus. We have read through them here on this channel. There is another video I have that is the 12,000 year disaster cycle, where we go through scientific proofs from other people talking about the same thing. We, right now, are imminently faced with the consummation by fire. That is something that has been written prior to Christianity at all, and completely independent of any understanding of Christianity whatsoever. These things are not just given by Egypt and Plato, but they are referred to here on the North American continent and the South American continent, completely independent of any influence from Christianity whatsoever. And so it is not a day of judgment by which Christ returns. But again, those problems with prophecy, you can only interpret it in the understanding that you have. And so if your understanding of that day is that it is because of Christ, then that is what you're going to see when it is revealed to you. That does not mean it is true. I believe that there was a vision. If you go back to Isaiah, it's fairly clear. If you go to Daniel, it's fairly clear. If you go to Ezekiel, it's not quite as clear, but it's still there. Right? We've done that. We read that. It is there. There is something going to happen. I believe that they saw it. They didn't say it was Jesus coming back. They said it was God. There's a major difference between those two terms. And so there is something, but it is not this. And it is entirely possible that Mr. Ashmole had that reference, right? That Plato reference. In brief, by the true and various rule of the philosopher's prima materia, there are diversities of gifts, but the same spirit. Agreed. The perfection of liberal sciences are made known. The whole wisdom of nature may be grasped. And, notwithstanding what has been said, I must further add, there are yet hid greater things than these, for we have seen but a few of his works. I agree with that as well. Howbeit, there are but a few stocks that are fitted to inculate the grafts of science on. They are mysteries incommunicable to any but the adept, and those that have been devoted even from their cradles to serve and wait at this altar, and how rarely such have been heard of, may appear by Norton. For few, faith he, I don't know the word, scarcely one in 15 kingdoms had our red stone. Okay, for a few, scarcely one in 15 kingdoms had the red stone. Now, that understanding of the reddening, that is going to be the second part of the process, beginning the third. And they perhaps were, with St. Paul, caught up in paradise, and as be heard unspeakable words, for they wrought inoperable works, such it is not lawful for to utter. And don't think Paul did any works, did he? He talked a good bit. I don't think he actually did the things that the others did, but there is a reason for that. Right? Paul's experience is exactly the same as mine. I have had a religious experience. I outlined it a minute ago. There was no Jesus involved in mine. Paul was stricken upon the road by an entity. It may or may not have been Jesus. Some of those entities, they can lie to you. It may or may not have been Jesus. And one way that you can discern the fruit of that is if an entity appears to you and he says, "Be not afraid," it's probably negatively aligned. It is probably not the entity that you want to be dealing with. That is a recurrent theme in the entirety of the Old Testament. You should go back and read it with that lens on. He had this experience, and he went around and he was spreading some doctrine. As a matter of fact, he is probably the rock upon which the entire thing was created. Not Peter, but instead Paul, right? Most of the letters are from him. But if you read the letters that came from Peter, he didn't write them himself, somebody else did. He talks about contention with another apostle, right? He talks about dismissal of the teachings of this apostle, that you should not pay any attention. There is a reference made by St. Mark, or the same thing. There is a reference made, who was else? Timaeus, maybe? Timothy? Regardless, there are several references made of contention between some of the apostles. Every single one of those instances, they're talking about Paul. As in, yeah, they're talking about this guy. Paul was in direct contention with everyone who actually studied with Jesus while he was alive. In direct contention, doctrinally, with everything that they were teaching. They were not concurrent almost at all. That is a big, big deal with that testament that so much is given to. And I don't think that Paul actually did any works. I'm pretty sure that was all the rest of them. As such as these, therefore I will glory, yet in myself I will not glory, but of mine infirmities. And truly, whether such were in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. God knoweth, doubtless they were not far from the kingdom of God. And again, you have the experience, but it does go through the filter of what you already know. This is another confirmation, right? He is telling you, I have felt this. I can't tell you if it was in my body or out. God knows, and that it was close to the kingdom of God. That again lets me know that he at least had the throne room experience. But I fear I have waited too far, and therefore now to give some particular account as well touching the publication of this work, as also the disposition thereof and the nature of obsolete language wherein it is written. I shall in the first place acquaint the reader that the kind acceptance my former endeavors received at the hands of candid artists in publishing some chemical collections very earnestly invited me to find out a second piece wherewith to present the whole grateful persons, whereupon I intended to rally up some of my own conceptions in this science and expose them also to the test. But, to this end, reviewing the philosophers, I found that many, assuming the name, wrote what their fancies, not their hands, had wrought, and further than in the apprehension had not seen projection. There's that experience again, and he is using that as a reference. I like that. Amongst whom our Ripley was sometimes one, as appears by his ingenious retraction hereafter mentioned. And being truly sensible of the great injury which works have done young students, at the first not able to distinguish who have written upon their undeceivable experience, who not, and consequently not which to follow, to which to avoid. I withdrew my thoughts, having never as yet let myself effectually upon the manual practice. Left, I should add to the many injuries the world has already suffered by delivering the bare medley of my dubious apprehensions without the confident attestation of practice, and be justly esteemed as indiscreet as those whom Ripley mentions that prate of Robin Hood and his bow, which never not shot therein, true. What he is saying here is what I started with, right? There is two kinds of alchemy. I have practiced one and not the other. He is telling you that he has not done the physical alchemy. That's what he is telling you right here. Yet, still casting about to make a choice of, at length, by the encouragement of some that are industrious after public benefit, centered my thoughts and fixed them on this design of collecting all, or as many as I could meet with, of our own English Hermetic philosophers and make them public. Nor did I change this resolution with my clothes, notwithstanding the difficulties I saw ready to encounter and obstruct the undertaking. For, besides the pains and cares that was thereto requisite, the fear of not meeting with or obtaining the original manuscripts or authentic copies of this nature, which I knew to be in some men's hands, yet wanting them myself, shrewdly beset, though nothing discouraged me, yet I therewith freely and plentifully supplied some worthy and intimate friends, whom I would gladly hear mentioned, but that I well know they delight not to see their names in print. That is a common occurrence. I am unusual. These had, my care was next to dispose them with such a series as might be answerable to the respective times wherein each author flourished, and withal to the best advantage of the laborious student, the which I have managed with so just an adequation as, I hope, will neither detract from the honor of the one, nor yet disturb and darken the path of the other. But, whilst I was doing this, I made a question, In regard, some philosophers had written in verse, others in prose. Which of these should take precedency? And after some consideration, adjudged it to the poetic part. And that, not only because its original may probably anticipate the time of Orpheus, although he be noted by Marius, Primus Antilles, Sacerdos, Theologus, Vates, and Dr. Totius Gracorum Nationis, because that Linus is said to be the most perite of any lyric poet, and so ancient that some suppose him master to Orpheus, who writ that admirable allegory of the golden fleece, and was the first of all the Grecians that brought the chemic learning, with other sciences, out of Egypt, as the other the first that brought the Phoenician learning to the Grecians. I say not only that for this, that is the ancientest and prose, but of latter use with other nations. But because poetry hath been most anciently used with us, and from as if from a grant of nature, held unquestionable. Again, the excellent melody thereof is so natural and universal that it seems to be born with all the nations of the world as a hereditary eloquence proper to all mankind. Nor was this all, for I considered it claims a general succession and reception in all nations, all ages, who would never without a Homer, a Virgil, or an Ovid, no, not this small segment of the world, England, without a Rapus Clephentrus and a Hortensius. For the first of these, his Liber Luminium and his Lumen de Luminium, are the ancients now extant in Latin verse, in the latter of which I cannot omit the title of his Reponio Resis Sufenceris Filio Fulis Morlino, whereby it appears he was Merlin's contemporary, at least, if not his master in this absolute mystery. These works of his are both published by Hermanus, but very imperfectly, as I found by comparing them with a manuscript, as ancient as King John's time. And for the second, he was the first Christian philosopher after Murenius, who, traveling abroad and returning hither in the reign of William the Conqueror, because he was the first that transplanted the chemical muse from remote parts into his own country, is called Garland, ab coronam hermeticum and poeticum. But, return to our matter. It is neither its antiquity, nor the natural ratification, general succession, and reception thereof, were enough to allow the right hand of fellowship, yet I suppose the effects hereof, which so affect and delight the ears, rejoice the heart, satisfy the judgment, and indulge the hearers, justly may. In regard, poesy has a life, a pulse, and such a secret energy as leaves the mind a far deeper impression than what runs in the flow and evenless numbers of prose, whereby it won so much upon the world that in rude times, and even amongst barbarous nations, when other sorts of learning stood excluded, there was nothing more in estimation, and for that we call rhyme, the custom of diverse or Saxon and Norman poets shows the opinion they had thereof, whilst the Latin, notwithstanding its excellency, could not sufficiently delight the ears, unless their verses, in that language, were formed with a harmonical cadence and brought into rhythm. Nor did the ancients wrap up their chiefest mysteries anywhere else than in the parabolical and elusive parts of poetry, and most sacred and venerable in their esteem, and the securest from profane and vulgar wits. For such was the goodness of the fathers that they would not willingly hazard, much less throw, their children's bread among dogs. I am throwing that among dogs. Not that you're a dog. And therefore their wisdom and policy was, first, to find a way to teach, and then an art, which was this, to conceal. In a word, to offer prose before poetry in no other or better than to let a rough-hewn clown take the wall of a rich-clad lady of honor, or to hang a preference chamber with tarpaulin instead of tapestry. And for the reasons, and out of their respects, the poetical, I conceived, deserved the presidency. Howbeit, probably, some of their pieces, now brought to public light, have well nigh perished in fluent ruin, in silent ruin, and destruction give a complete victory over them, but that my diligence and laborious inquisition rescued them from the jaws thereof, being almost quite shrouded in the dust of antiquity, and involved in the obscurity of forgotten things, with their leaves half worm-eaten. And a wonder it is that, like the creatures in Noah's Ark, they were hitherto so lately preserved from that universal deluge which the dissolution of abbeys overflowed our greatest libraries. And in doing thus, I presume in no arrogance to challenge the reputation of a performing a work, next that of a man's own, and something more in that, as if having the elixir itself, I have made old age become young and lively by restoring each of the ancient writers, not only to the spring of their several beauties, but to the summer of their strength and perfection. As for the whole work itself, it is showed up from a few gleanings in part of our English fields, where, though I have bestowed in my industry to pick up here and there what I could find in my way, yet I believe there are many other pieces of this nature in private hands. We talked about that, which, if any are pleased, out of some ingenious score that I have published these, to communicate to me, I shall set thereupon a value suitable to the worth of their favors, and let the world know its obligation to them besides. The style and language thereof may, I confess, to some, seem irksome and uncouth, and so it is indeed to those that are strangers thereunto, but withal very significant. Old words have strong emphasis. Others may look upon them as rubbish or trifles, but they are grossly mistaken. For what some light brains may esteem as foolish toys, deeper judgments can and will value as sound and serious matter. We English have often varied our fashions, such is the levity of our fancies, and therefore if you meet with spellings different from those in use, or uncouth words as strangely ridiculous as a maunch, hood, codpiece, or trunk hose, know, as they were fashionable attires, so these the usual dialects of those times. And posterity will pay us in our own coin, should we deride the behavior and dress of our ancestors. So that we must consider the languages which are daily used in our discourse are in as continental mutation. What custom brings into habit is best liked to the present, whether it be revive what is lost or introduce something new, or to piece up the present with the restrained shreds of what preceded. But learned tongues, which are contained in books, enjoy a more immutable fate, because not subject to be washed away in the daily tide and current of times. They are like the fashion and drapery wrought on marble statues, which must ever be retained without alteration. And therefore, that the truth and worth of their works might receive no diminution by my transcription, I purposely retain the old words and their manner of spelling as I found them in the originals, except only some palpable mistakes and blemishes of former transcribers, which I took upon me to correct and purge as little more than literal imperfections. Yet not to have the reader unsatisfied, have added a compendious table for the interpretation of old, unusual, or obsolete words, and thereby smoothed, as I suppose, the passage for such as have not hitherto been conversant in the ancient rough-hewn expressions. Wherefore, you that love to converse with the dead or consult with their monuments, draw near. Perhaps you may find benefit in them, than the living. There you may meet with the genii of our Hermetic philosophers, learn the language in which they wooed and courted Dame Nature, and enjoy them more freely and at greater command, to satisfy your doubts, than when they were in the flesh, for they have written more than they would speak, and left their lines of rich, as if they had dissolved gold in their ink, and clad their words with the sovereign master. My annotations are limited within the bounds of what is historical, or what occasionally must needs entrench on the confines of other arts, and all glosses upon the philosophical work purposefully omitted, for the same reasons that I chose to send forth other men's children into the world, rather than my own. And what presumptuous mistakes or errors the candid reader shall meet with will, I hope, be censured with no less favor and charity than that whereby they are wont to judge the faults of those they esteem their friends and well-wishers. And now, to conclude, may the God of nature be gratuitously pleased, out of the immense treasury of goodness, to vouchsafe all such whole good angels direct them to, or have already religiously engaged them in this mysterious knowledge, the full and entire accomplishments of a true and pious philosopher, to wit, learning, humility, judgment, courage, hope, patience, discretion, charity, and secrecy. There's a lot of this in what I have in these 7 right here. That they may enjoy the fruits of their labors, which otherwise will be but vain and unpleasant, and causelessly render the divine science and secret itself contemptible. Farewell, industrious students, and let your goodness still invite me to accomplish the end I have proposed, in doing which, I presume, you may one day esteem me better deserving your patronage. At least wise, your charitable censure, which is all the recompense expected or merited by him, who is yours, really devoted, Elias Ashmill. And that is going to bring us to the end of the introduction. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I have been given a gift of discernment for a reason. I have been given the gift of healing for a reason. I have been given all of these things so that I can disseminate them. Part of me being of the order of Melchizedek, which we did not get into today, is part of that spiritual experience, is that I am here to relay this information, to give the truth to whomsoever shall seek it. That does not mean that I am here to browbeat any particular religious organization, even though I probably will hammer the Catholic Church fairly diligently, because there's not a lot of redeeming value in that particular control system. So all of the rest of them are wrong, but at least they're probably aligned correctly. I know, that seems like a contradiction. It's not. I'm not going to continue to add on to this. We will be going through this quite extensively. We will be talking about these things before, but this is the video that I'm going to point people back to, so we had to begin with a little extra. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment whether you agree or disagree with anything that was stated. Put it in the box down below, and if it remains respectful, that is the key, it gets to remain up. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership, picking up a copy of my book where I teach all of this to you fairly efficiently, or reaching out through any of the links down below for a consultation or just to support the channel. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are, and this has been pittstake. Peace.